Okay, I'm Dr. Rami Gudovitch. I'm a philosophy instructor, and I'm activist with the refugee community in Israel, and in particular with the Eritrean community in recent years.
And could you tell us a little bit about, we see a lot of grief here. People are really mourning and sad, and thousands were gathered here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is not the first time, and I am afraid not the last time that we see such gatherings here. This time it's mourning those who died last week in the boat that sank off the shore of Italy. And unfortunately, many people from the Eritrean community in Israel have lost some of their relatives in this event and in previous events. So this gathering is very personal for most people, because they actually in recent week I've met most of my friends were in the homes of families of people who lost their relatives, including children. And this is just a very real event, in the sense that it's not a mourning of something symbolic, but it's mourning of some event in the people's own lives and community.
Yeah, and could you? Is there? Do you think it says something about the situation in? The immigration issue in Europe and the way they treat.
Yeah, one thing, all over the world, people. Countries, especially the EU, but other countries, of course Israel, are trying to give refugees, but in particular Eritrean refugees, less and less rights. Just recently Swiss have declared that Eritreans cannot, that just defecting from the army is not a reason for receiving a refugee status, which is a very strange claim, because of course it's not, the reason is not that people defected from the army, but what will happen to them given that they're defected from the army if they will return to Eritrea, which is a reason, since they are very likely to lose their lives and to be tortured. This is a reason to gain a refugee status. But people don't know much about the facts of Eritrea. Many of the refugees inside Africa and trying to flee out of Africa nowadays are Eritreans. And if you think about it, there's something very peculiar about it, because there are 5 million Eritreans. It's a very small country in a continent of 1 billion people. Something must explain why such a high percentage of Eritreans are fleeing out of Eritrea. Only in Sudan there are 500,000 Eritrean refugees. And if, like countries around the world and people, politicians in Israel and in other countries were right, and the Eritrean refugees are simply trying to get a better life, and that's the only reason why they're trying to escape Eritrea, that would not explain why people flee out of Eritrea in such higher percentages than they flee out of other countries. And
ready to risk their life in such a way.
Yes. The conditions in Eritrea are not. I'm working with people in South Sudan, and I have some projects in South Sudan and with South Sudanese that were in Israel and are now back in Juba. And I must say that you cannot compare. I haven't been to Eritrea, but just from knowing very well and getting testimonies from Eritrean people, the objective life conditions in Eritrea are not as far better than, for example, in South Sudan and in many other African countries. So, these people are clearly, in a way, there are many troubles in some parts of Africa. It's not, I don't want to overlook other current difficulties, but there is this thing that could deserve the title, the Eritrean tragedy. And this tragedy is partly caused by the fact that the countries in the world are not acting with sufficient enthusiasm against the Eritrean regime.
Dictatorship, yeah.
And at the same time, they are doing everything they can to present the Eritreans are nothing more than
Working migrants.
yes.
Yeah. And Rami, could you maybe in a few sentences describe the situation they're facing in Israel?
Yeah, I mean the situation is they are they don't get official work permits. Israel is pushing them. Just in the recent 2 weeks, I've seen many shops in areas that until now that are run by Eritrean people of the Eritrean community that were shut down by the municipalities. There's a lot of racist talk against the Eritreans, especially by government officials.
We call them infiltrators.
Yes, they call them infiltrators, and they always say about the Eritreans that they're just coming for jobs and that they're violent. And the truth is that the only, whenever there's any crime committed by a member of the Eritrean community, this it gives headlines in the newspaper. Because I'm working here with all communities, I can tell you that one very bothering fact is that whenever there is any, for example, sex offense involving when the victims are minors and it involves refugees, so it's in the headlines of the newspapers. But whenever there is something of the opposite nature and the victim is minors from the refugee community, and that happens very often, unfortunately, and the predators are from the Israeli community, of course nobody will publish it, not because this is the natural thing to do. When a minor is being harmed, you want to protect a minor, you don't want a headline in the newspaper. So the victims paradoxically are also the Israeli minors that are being sometimes victims, because they have the right for privacy and not to be in the headlines of the newspapers. But this never ends up being what
And Rami, could you maybe mention in a few words the Saharonim jail in
now the human rights organizations have won a major and very trivial victory over the government when the High Court in with all members of the High Court, including the conservative head of the chair of the High Court, have declared one of the main laws the government used to fight the refugees. They cancelled it. They declared it as unconstitutional, and they cancelled the law. And this is going to have major impact, because Israel is not allowed anymore to put refugees in prison unless they have failed an RSD process and they are a candidate to be deported. That means that the main mechanism Israel was using to deport Eritreans and North Sudanese, which is to force them to sign a consensual agreement to be deported under the threat that they're going to be put in prison for the rest of their lives, is not in Israel's hand.
Without even being trialed.
Yeah. Of course, no. It's just like because they are. The point is that Israel is trying to push refugees to sign that they're willing to go back to their countries of origin, and the way they do it is that they made this law and allowing to imprison refugees for the rest of their lives without any trial, and they use that. They tell people, okay, you can either go to your own country and or go to jail, or be lucky and escape jail, or you can stay here in Saharonim for the rest of your life. And of course, this is good enough. You come every morning, like they used to come to them. They still do that, I heard. They come to the prisoners, to the detainees a few times a day. These people are tired. The people are hungry. They come to them at 4 o'clock in the morning. You just need to sign once. Once you're being pushed to sign. And there are many things that happen in Saharonim, even internal tension between the detainees. And you might have, if someone comes to you 3 times a day and telling you, this what you have here is what you have for the rest of your life. You have no light ahead of you. Just sign here and let's see what next. Once you sign it, you're a candidate to be deported, and nothing could stop it. and now this law has been cancelled. So
Yeah, but still not implemented. I mean,
still not-
Israel didn't release them in the last 2 weeks.
yeah, and what we heard is that the people that are being released from prison are being released without any visa.
Yeah.
So it's not even. I mean, the visa now doesn't allow the asylum seekers to work, but at the same time, there's a decision that the government have promised the human rights organization in court not to implement this and to not to fine employers if they give work to asylum seekers, because officially Israel is signed on the Refugee Convention, so they must give them jobs. If they don't give them jobs, they cannot enforce not giving them jobs. So now these people that were released from prison are not given. I mean, Israel is still trying to push them as far as, because they wouldn't have jobs, and if they wouldn't have jobs, they will be in the streets, and if they'll be in the streets, they might end up. You know what happens to people that don't have jobs and don't have apartments and don't have food? Nothing good, and nothing good happens to the neighborhoods where they live.
Yeah, and we should maybe remember the last, the former Minister of Interior that said, you know, officially, we want to make their life here so miserable that they will leave.
Unfortunately, the current minister is doing it in a much harsher way than Eli Yishai. Eli Yishai was a caricature, a very bad caricature, but now we are dealing with a much harsher and much more cruel government than the previous one.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Rami Gudovitch. Toda. Thanks. Yeah.